right, everybody. Welcome to another version or episode of Badass Banking. And I've got a badass banker with me today. He is Corey LeBlanc. Am I pronouncing that right? Because my French sucks.
No, you got it perfectly, man. Usually I get LeBlanc, so that you nailed it.
Well, and you're down there in Louisiana, so pronunciation gets all over the place. I got a very good friend of mine who's my neighbor's from Louisiana. So you were SVP at Origin Bank down there. Now you're not on the water though, right? Are you inland?
No, we're in Ruston, Louisiana. So we're north central Louisiana. We're closer to Arkansas than we are to New Orleans. So we're at the very top center of the boot. I grew up in central Louisiana and much closer to the water. We try to get there as much as we possibly can, but no, it's just lakes is about the best thing we got up here.
I've spent a little time in Baton Rouge, but most of my time, like probably most in the banking industry, has been in New Orleans. So now, do you say Louisiana or is it Louisiana? How do you pronounce it?
I say Louisiana, but I'm a military brat. I was in the military. I traveled a bit, so I would say that I've lost a little bit of the accent and the enunciation of the way South Louisiana does things. And being in North Louisiana for 13 years now, I've almost completely lost it. Try to tell everybody, if you want to try to correlate this thing, it's Swamp People is where I grew up. Duck Dynasty is where I live now, and so my accent is adjusted to that accordingly.
There you go. I've lived all over the country, so I don't have an accent. I lived in New Jersey, Massachusetts, went to school in New Hampshire. I have no accent. Lived in Atlanta. So let's talk for a minute about the bank. So what's Origin? First of all, what do you do at the bank?
Right. Yeah, it's a really long title to basically say that I used to be the CTO at the bank, but we decided that actually committing to technology as it relates to customer experiences and creating efficiencies and really driving the bank forward needed to be something that wasn't necessarily dependent on just being inside of IT. So when we pulled my role out of the IT department, we decided to give it a new title. And so actually our Chief Brand and Communications Officer, Ryan Kilpatrick, came up with my title, Chief Digital and Innovation Officer. I think he did it just to make it really hard for me to register for conferences, but it does get a lot of questions. But essentially what my role is just that, right? Make sure that we're taking technology and aligning it to the needs of our customers and making sure that it actually creates efficiencies and good products for the bank moving forward.
Yep. Well, and it makes sense. I mean, the timing for people like you is right. You're out there on Twitter. I see you all the time. Again, it's the inked banker on Twitter, not the linked banker who I interviewed last week. I had to mention him because I mentioned you last week. Today, it was kind of interesting. You and I were on Twitter, and I think we were poking fun a little at the Chevron story on Google check-in. It seems like nobody, including the financial institutions that are offering, know what the hell it is. Any thoughts on that?
No, it's fascinating, right? So I think it was really interesting in the article is where they're starting to ask people, right? And try to get an understanding of how many people would have an appetite to actually go use a Google checking account. And there's a lot of things from the information security aspects and a ton of things that we'll probably talk about, and get to later. But the fact that people are showing interest in something that they don't even know what it is just really fascinating to me. So it almost speaks volumes to either A, people just wanting to see something different, or B, people just not really having confidence in their financial institutions as things have started to close down, that they're able to deliver the same experience that a Google or an Amazon or some of these other tech players can do. But I think it's interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what the heck the experience would be. I mean, based on Ron's questions, which were great questions, the participating financial institutions really didn't describe it. I mean, I'm looking at the article right now. One of them, it was BBVA. I mean, this is a powerful financial institution. We're not able to share details at this juncture, given that we want to save some of the specifics for the launch. Personally, I think that sounds like a cop-out. Bank Mobile said, we're in the process of working with Google to co-create the best experience for our student customers. So I have no details to share at this time. I mean, I get that, right? And I agree with the student customer experience that Bank Mobile is trying to build. I mean, they've got a pretty strong niche there, but I would have thought there'd be some details with this latest round of news. Something.
Well, one of the things that was fascinating to me as well is whenever you kind of look at some of the releases on, from Google and from the financial institutions, they talk about delivering the technology and the customer experience and the user interface and all of these things. But then they talk about relying on the bank's infrastructure, right, for the banking component. And so I wonder how much of that is factoring into the fact that they don't want to overpromise something right now that maybe they can't necessarily deliver down the road, or they're still trying to figure out some of the logistics specifically to the financial institutions, because each one of those are going to have something that's very different as far as it relates to tech stack and capability. I would imagine that's part of it. Then I think there is maybe some aspect of it too. They want to save some really cool stuff to talk about at launch, but then I think a lot of it is still trying to figure some stuff out.
Maybe the goal is just to get people like you and me to talk about it, and people like Ron. You know, Ron went out in the article and he said, "What will a Google checking account offer?" So he put together a list of the features and benefits he sees, and I think he's on the money. No pun intended. One was a streamlined account opening. That's a no-brainer. That's something that you guys want to do at your bank.
Yeah.
Are you already doing digital onboarding of some kind?
We are. We're doing digital onboarding, but just like most financial institutions that are dealing with the crisis right now, we're looking to reevaluate all of those types of solutions. And
Right.
digital onboarding, particularly as it relates to commercial and small business, those are areas we absolutely want to improve on. We're not really heavily involved in marketing that digital onboarding process just yet. But, you know, every bit of this thing is going to start from our internal processes first. And so we're looking at, okay, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong internally? And then we're starting to try to align, but we're having those conversations to improve it now. But, you know, I think that's a safe bet, though. What Ron's saying here is it's absolutely going to have this streamlined account opening process, because if you're going to do anything in financial services or anything with a tech vendor, you're going to have to make it really easy for the customers to onboard. Because, look, as traditional financial institutions, we know that it's very hard to do customer acquisition, right? Unless you can either A, create substantial value or reduce the cost of doing so. And you better do both. You're probably not going to be ultimately successful.
Yep, that makes sense. The other thing he mentions is real-time contextual merchant offers rather. I really like that. Are you guys doing anything with merchant offers today tied to checking or anything like that?
No, we're not. We're doing some rewards programs inside of our checking. One of our checking accounts where if you do business through that specific account, you can get rewards at various merchants across the city or specific vendors that you like working with. But we're not doing anything in a direct contextual merchant offer. We are looking more heavily right now into the utilization of customer segmented data, right? Actually starting to structure data from a transactional level to start to maybe possibly do this a little bit, or at the very least put customers in the right product, the right service, right, with a little bit more guidance than what we maybe have in the past. But, you know, I think this is where Google is going to really excel in something like this for the financial institutions that are working with them, just because they have a better understanding, a better grip of how to do this right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is all about data. I mean, the amount of data they have is incredible. If they can turn that data into something that's relevant and contextual, that's great. Which brings me to the next point that Ron brings up, and that's financial insights. You know, he's looking for a quote unquote eye-catching array of analysis around budgeting, spend analysis, cash flow. Sounds very PFM-ish to me. You guys have a PFM yet?
It does. Yeah, so we're actually partners with MX.
Okay. Yeah, good.
Been working with those guys since about 2017. We launched in 2018 to all of our consumer product holders. And so it's an adoptable service today where they can adopt account aggregation, cleanse transaction views, which I think are two of the most critical aspects of what customers and the consumers out are doing in their banking today. This isn't the quick in out every single day you're looking at type stuff. Then we also have the more in-depth utilities of the budget tools and some of the things like net worth analysis and things like that the customers can use to better control, better manage, better understand their finances and where they are. It's something that, you know, I've been, you know, champion and try to expand as much as possible. Because again, right now it's an adoptable service. What I'm trying to do is push real heavily as an organization. How do we start to put this in place for 100% of our customers? How do we make this the experience as opposed to an adoptable or optional experience? Because I think that the value of the insights and the data and the things that you can give to the customer is huge.
And I think that's the MX strategy. I think they want to see it brought to the forefront.
That's right.
Which makes sense. And they, you know, those guys really understand the value of enriched data, and that's been part of their message for years. And, you know, they're doing some great work. And then finally, Ron talks about the overall new banking experience. I don't know, frankly, what experience a retail or a business customer actually expects from their bank. I think personally, I expect them to be there when they need them, but maybe their expectations are kind of low. And conceivably, maybe that's an opportunity for Google to come and wow them. I don't know. Do you think people expect more from their banks than they're actually getting?
I think that customers expect more from a digital component. I don't know that they're necessarily expecting more for their banks, but I think if you can offer them something that is exceptionally better, that you can start to create that expectation, right? And so these big tech companies have been really good at that, right? In the way that they've handled all the other different services and things that, companies like Google and Amazon and stuff have entered, or even Apple. So I think what Ron's talking about here is kind of creating that larger ecosystem that, us bankers have been talking about for a little while now, is how do you start to kind of blur the lines between, merchant and retail and spending and all these other things and the bank account process? Because let's face it, as a bank, nobody's wanting to log into our app because they're bored, right? No one's sitting around in bed just saying, I would love to go play around with my account balances real quick, just check things out. This is a chore for a lot of people. And so I think as you start to simplify that, put it at the checkout point, put it at the point of sale where the customer is actually engaged in something that they need, that's something that's important to them. As a financial institution, if we can make that easier and faster and simpler, I think we create greater affinity. So that's where I think he's going with that. And I think that he is right on point, because if that's not what they're trying to do with Google Pay and this, then I think they've absolutely missed the boat.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe they don't know based on the responses. Maybe they're just testing the waters here. But yeah, I would agree, and that's something Brett King's talked about for years. The friction that's in bank, it's a pain in the ass. I mean, let's be very blunt. And nobody looks forward to it. I mean, I dread it. I'm using right now the Microsoft Money plaid thing that's tied to Excel, and I've already had 2 disconnects from Chesapeake Bank. So I bank, my daily bankings at Chesapeake Bank and also Atlantic Union, big regional banks up here. One's $2 billion, which is Chesapeake, and I think Atlantic Union's around $20 billion. I'm not having a problem with Atlantic Union, but Chesapeake keeps disconnecting for whatever reason. I don't know if it's a Jack Henry issue or whatever. But now I'm second guessing that relationship because I can't get my daily feed without having to re-enter all my credentials again. That doesn't make me feel too good. So that's friction. And it could be a plaid issue too. You just don't know. So I don't know how forgiving consumers are when they try these new technologies and then they don't work. Which takes me to another point. Google's got a track record of trying things, buying things, and then abandoning them. I mean, we're not on Google Hangouts right now, right? We're on Zoom, a new player. I wonder how dedicated Google will be to this. And if I were a banker, I'd be a little apprehensive. I'd be excited because it's Google, Alphabet, but I'd be a little nervous at the same time.
Yeah, I wouldn't be putting everything as far as it relates to my innovation strategy from the consumer perspective into this. This would have to be a separate strategy to what you're already doing for your original customers, right? And so that's where we really got to kind of look at this. I think it's interesting for the 8 financial institutions, I think, that are playing with this, and these are pretty forward-thinking organizations. So I would imagine that that's how they're taking this. I think it's a win-win potential for them if they handle it correctly. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you don't know what Google is going to do with this moving forward. They very well could sit there and say, hey, this isn't exactly the return that we wanted on this, and we're going to completely abandon it. Or they may say, hey, we've learned enough about this financial institutions thing or this banking type stuff, and we're going to start to try to go get our own charter, or we're going to become a greater, bigger bank, or we're going to go to a more strategic partnership with a larger institution that we can specifically align to. And now we only have one single institution to deal with. I don't know that they'll necessarily, do either one of those, but they absolutely could. And so, it's fascinating. And so for me as the tech nerd, I'm sitting there looking at this like, is this something for my bank to try to reach out to try to figure out if there's something that we can get involved in? And it just doesn't make sense for us right now, right? There's not enough details. There's not enough things or value created for our customers. I would much rather be putting, my time and money into the existing products and services that we have and try to expand that for the entire customer base on something that we control. And that's something that, for me has been something I've been championing both internally and everyone I can talk about is creating as much control in the financial institution side onto what product and service we deliver moving forward. And that is something that scares me with some of these partnerships, but I do think we're going to see a lot more of this. So it's something we're going to have to familiarize ourselves with and kind of get comfortable with, particularly as it relates to expanding into that ecosystem, getting connected.
Yep, I agree, and I think big tech is here to stay as far as financial management and fintech is concerned. They obviously have an interest in this. I think it's built around the data and the power that data presents. I think it's good for the industry. I think it's good for community bankers like you. It's good for ex-fintechers or fintechers like me or the MXs of the world. It adds some competition and spice to it. Keeps us all on our toes. Brett King's been following, WeChat for a long time, and he knows that they're highly trusted as a banking partner of the Chinese, for example. So this will be interesting to see how it plays out. Let's shift gears real quick before we end. Let's talk about the small business environment. Now, obviously, we're all concerned about what's happening with the economy right now. A lot of unanswered questions, a lot of conflicting news, political disaster in front of us. We just don't know, left or right. You don't know who to trust anymore. Media, same way, Locally, though, how are small businesses doing in your markets? You serve, if I remember, it's Louisiana, Texas, and Alabama?
Mississippi.
And
so we're the three connected states. So we're from Jackson, Mississippi, all the way to Dallas across that I-20 corridor, and we're also in Houston. And so obviously, Houston and Dallas are very different markets than North Central Louisiana. We're much smaller communities, in North Central Louisiana, which is predominantly where most of our consumer base sits. That's what we call our core market. But during the beginning of this whole entire, crisis or pandemic or whatever you want to call it, we started reaching out to our customers to find out, well, what can we do to help you guys? And so it was a very manual process. And, being the technology guy, I want to sit there and try to find a way to automate or improve something, but we couldn't remove that element of actually reaching out and having a conversation with them to try to make them confident either in the process or in the direction in which we wanted to try to advise them to go. Then as PPP and some of those other things came around, we were really active in trying to get those customers, signed up, trying to get through the whole entire process of paperwork and everything like that so they can get the funds and stuff to help them support their businesses to grow. We were really successful in reaching the vast majority of our customers. There's been some things on social and everything that we've kind of put out there on some of the numbers, and we did so very cautiously because we wanted to make sure we weren't, promoting, this fact that Origin Bank has helped all these other customers if there were still people that needed help. And so, at the end of this, we feel really confident that we've improved the ability for a lot of small businesses to stay afloat. And we're hoping that, this is just the beginning. We know that. We're hoping that the changes, modifications, technologies, and things that we're starting to line since then and what we've learned over the past, couple of months will help us, even further that relationship with the customer and keep growing their ability to be successful moving forward. But we're seeing a lot of impact like everybody else. Obviously, you can go look at the numbers. Louisiana and Texas have not fared very well with the reopenings. We've had a lot of problems. Our numbers start rising.
We're all having problems, believe me. It's not just your area. I mean, Virginia, we started out pretty well, and then we kind of plateaued a bit. And I don't think it's really getting that much better right now. I think we're becoming a little accustomed and a little numb to it. It's a sad reality of the situation we're in today. Hopefully we can get a vaccine out there and fix it. Well, I'm glad you guys are doing a lot for small business. I follow you guys on social. Obviously, I follow you personally on social. I mean, how can you not follow the Inked Banker? I mean, that is a badass banker. But it's good to see all the banks. I really think in this whole crisis, the bankers and the credit union people out there, the level of collaboration has just gone through the roof. And if anything good comes out of the Google checking thing, I hope it's a high level of collaboration with the bankers that are involved. And I hope that the Googles listen, because as you just touched upon, a good retail banking experience or even business banking experience is really that high tech, high touch environment we've talked about. You guys personally had your bankers out there engaging their audience, their clients, and the small business. That's what Jill Castilla does at Citizens. That's what they do here at Chesapeake. It's a human experience, and it's good to see that's continuing. I don't think technology is ever going to replace banking as we know it today. I think it's going to augment it and ideally make it better. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think I just want to agree with you. I don't think we ever want to sit there and completely automate or replace banking or people, right? We always want to use technology as an augmentation. I think that's the right path to go. I think ethically it makes sense. I think as humans, that's what we are drawn to. But I do think technology plays a key role. You mentioned Jill Castillo. You mentioned the fact of me being on social and things like that. The collaboration, the conversations that I had with people like Jill, and Kurt over at Tab Bank and so many others in the fintech community, through this whole process helped us make the decisions on what was the best path for us to be able to kind of meet those needs of our customers. And so, it was invaluable, the connections and the people that were just willing to lend a hand to other institutions just to make sure that their customers were helped. And, for me, I just want to make sure that as we look at this thing, that we're keeping the customer, first with it. The things that concern me with this is the data privacy and some of the things that could potentially come from this. I want to make sure that the customers also in the financial institutions are able to get a product out there that delivers the insights and the proper stuff through the data that is needed for the customers without putting them at risk or making them feel uncomfortable or untrusting of financial services.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, listen, I really appreciate Corey. I'm going to put all your contact info in the comments down below. It's been
Awesome.
a pleasure. I'm going to have your wife on one time too, because she's like running blogs for all these people. I think it's time somebody actually interviews Cassie.
Hey, try to get her on here. I try to get her to talk or get in front of a camera. She is way smarter, better than I ever will be. She likes being behind the camera. I tell her my goal is by this time next year, she's going to be running and on camera at some point. So
there you go.
Get her on here.
There you go. Well, I appreciate it. So for those of you watching, like, dislike, comment, subscribe. This is still an experiment. I'm having a good time. Corey, thank you. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks, Brian, for having me. I've been loving the show, man.